Michelle Carter, you remember her? She was actually convicted of involuntary manslaughter in the murder-suicide of Conrad Roy. Well, believe it or not, she's back in the news again. And we're going to talk about that and a whole lot more right here on today's Charlie Crimebuster. Charlie Crimebuster, which has been called the fastest 30 minutes in crime talk. Well, good day and welcome to Charlie Crimebuster. Charlie Crimebuster here. Thank you for joining us. If you're a new listener, we certainly say thank you. We would encourage you to subscribe to the podcast on your own favorite social media platform. We have a number of listeners, and we thank each and every one of you, and we would appreciate you getting the word out because we share everyday news that can help you. And we try to share lessons on every podcast that can help you and your family be more safe. And boy, today's program, it's sure a doozy because we're going to be talking about Michelle Carter. You see, we're going to talk about 5 things that you may not know about that case. 5 things you may not know about that case. You remember back in July 2014, it was 18-year-old then, Conrad Roy. He died by suicide in his car. He was at a parking lot in Fairhaven, Massachusetts. You see, police then discovered a series of alarming text messages from his girlfriend, who was then 17 years of age, and that was Michelle Carter. Those texts, it seemed to encourage him to kill himself. And that discovery, well, they were all kinds of headlines, not only nationwide but worldwide. And it led to a trial that raised all kinds of questions about social media, mental health, technology, and always asking if one person can be held responsible for the suicide of another. And so that is our feature story, Murdered by Text. It is a look at the July 2017 charge of involuntary manslaughter, whereby Michelle Carter encouraged Conrad Roy to kill himself. And we're going to share with you 5 things that you may not know about the case. And the very first one is this. Michelle Carter, who was convicted of involuntary manslaughter, well, she's scheduled to be released from jail next week. That's right. Released from jail next week. You see, she's getting out early because of good behavior. It was on August the 3rd, 2017, that the judge there sentenced Carter to serve a 2.5-year term, 15 months to be served in the Bristol County House of Corrections. The rest of the balance was suspended, and of course there were 5 years probation tacked on to that. After Conrad took his life in July 2014, no one really questioned the suicide. That wasn't till cops got a hold of his cell phone. And it would prove to be an investigation like no other. For you see, friend, there was no gun, no knife, no crucial DNA in the case. Only this, a trail of words, starting with those on the cell phone, text messages with Michelle Carter. And once they found that dialogue, well, they knew that there was something else up, and they wanted to get to the bottom of it. And so that investigation that started as a suicide investigation, well, it turned into a homicide investigation. They found thousands of texts from Carter on his phone, many of them encouraging him to kill himself. And that's our future story today. But the first thing that you may not know is that she is to be released early next week. And in this world of texting, tweeting, and Facebooking, well, here's a news story that surfaced this week about Snapchat and how Snapchat saved the day. She was 14 years of age, and she was kidnapped in Northern California, and yet she used Snapchat to share her location with friends, and then they called 911. You see, the girl, she had met Albert Thomas Vasquez. He was 55 years of age on Tuesday. That was according to the San Jose Police Department. And Vasquez, he gave the 14-year-old girl, drugs. She became incapacitated. And then he called 2 other men, 34-year-old Antonio Salvador and 31-year-old Gonzalez. They helped move the girl in their vehicle. Vasquez then sexually assaulted the girl in the vehicle. Then the man drove the girl to a motel in San Jose, and they carried her to a room on the second floor, and then Vasquez sexually assaulted her again. Now, while she was in the hotel, this little 14-year-old girl, she was smart enough to use Snapchat, the Snapchat app on her phone, to tell her friends that she had been kidnapped. However, she didn't know where she was. And it was her friends that determined her location. They determined it through the app, and they called 911. And once police arrived, well, they found Vasquez leaving the motel room with the girl left inside. He was arrested on charges of kidnapping to commit rape, digital penetration with a child under 14 with force, false imprisonment, lewd act on a child, rape by intoxication or controlled substance. And those two other scumbags, Salvador and Gonzalez, well, they were arrested Wednesday on charges of kidnapping and conspiracy. You see, Snapchat, it's a social media app. It allows users to communicate with others through instant pictures and videos. And friends on the app, they can choose to share their locations with one another. That is, if the app is open. That's according to Snapchat developers. You see, social media, for better or worse, it's very much part of our lives. And while it does give another avenue for the bad guys to take advantage of us, it also gives people another opportunity. An opportunity to use social platform as a safety tool, keeping us safe and getting us help when we need it. Just recently, there was another story about a couple who was traveling around the world, and they were in a scooter accident. They didn't know where they were. They didn't have any idea how to get help. And then they just sent out an SOS on Facebook. Friends all found it. He dropped a pin where they were, and they were saved from perhaps death, you see. So you can use social media for the good. That's why we do want to encourage you to go to our website, charliecrimebuster.com. And we go to the resource page, and you tap on that resource page. You click on that resource page. You're going to find the best safety apps of 2019. The best safety apps of 2019. We're going to encourage you to go there. Utilize those apps. Hey, friend, make your cell phone into a new safety tool. A safety tool that may save your life and the life of others. Well, our feature story today is Murdered by Text. It's the story of a young man, Conrad Roy, and a young lady, Michelle Carter. And there's a second thing that you may not know about this case. And that second thing is this. This young lady that had so much influence on this young man's life, well, she had really only seen him personally about 5 times. That's right. It was mostly a relationship of texting. Now, they were most certainly in love. You see, Carter and then 16-year-old Conrad Roy, they first met in Florida in 2012. They were vacationing, and they ran into each other down there. Each of them had been visiting relatives. And after that encounter, well, according to witnesses, they saw each other in person only a handful of times. That was over the course of 2 years. And get this, that was despite having lived only 35 miles away from each other. That was in the Boston suburbs. But they mostly exchanged text messages and emails, and they, through that avenue, developed a very strong relationship. And that case, which was being followed nationwide, it hinged on the power of words, Michelle Carter's words, and whether they could be deadly. At the heart of the question was whether Carter's texts and messages pushed Roy to take his life, or would he have done it anyway? Now, friend, do not minimize the power of words. Before you come to conclusion, think about some of the texts that she sent. Here are some of them. He started out saying, "I don't know what I'm waiting for. I have everything lined up," talking, of course, about a suicide. She responds, "No, you're not, Conrad. Last night was it. You keep pushing it off. And you'll say you do it, but you never do. It's always going to be that way. If you don't take action, you're just making it harder on yourself by pushing it off. You just have to do it." And then she goes on to say, "Do you want to do it now?" And then from him, "Is it too late?" And back again, "I don't know. It's already light outside. I'm going to go back to sleep. Love you. I'll text you tomorrow." "No. It's probably the best time now," she says, "because everyone's sleeping. Just go somewhere in your truck. And no one's really out right now because it's an awkward time. If you don't do it now, you're never going to do it. And you say you'll do it tomorrow, but you probably won't. Folks, that's just some of the texts. We're going to put a link on our website if you'd like to read more of them to determine of yourself, if you think that Carter was guilty of involuntary manslaughter for those texts that she sent. Well, there it is, Crazy by Patsy Cline. You know what that says to us. It says it's time. It's time for another crazy crook story from Charlie Crimebuster, and we, as usual, have a doozy here. This one comes to us from Arkansas, and the first words of it tells it all, doesn't it? Here it goes. After a night of drinking, two Arkansas men, they decided to test the durability of a bulletproof vest. That's right. And you know what happens next. They decided to test it out by shooting each other. That's right. Rogers residents Charles Eugene Ferris, he was 50, and Christopher Hicks, who was 36, they both ended up in the hospital. And there in the hospital, they told investigators that they were shot after they were hired for a secret mission, which involved following someone through Hobbs State Park. That was according to Benton County Sheriff's Office. But when Ferris's wife showed up at the hospital, she had a little different story to tell. She said the men had been drinking there on Ferris's back porch when he had asked Hicks to shoot him. Now, although the vest did stop the bullet, it still left a painful mark on Ferris's chest. And guess what? That upset Ferris. Imagine that. So when Hicks then put on the vest, Ferris, he unloaded the clip into Christopher's back. That was according to the affidavit. Both of those guys, they were arrested, and they were charged with felony aggravated assault. And before releasing them, there was a $5,000 bond, and then the judge, he issued a no-contact order between the men. Probably a pretty good idea. Now they each face up to 6 years. 6 years in prison and a maximum $10,000 fine. And you and I both agree, I think, that the best can be explained by, those first 5 words in the story. The first 5 words in the story, after a night of drinking. Now, our feature story is Murdered by Text. And we're talking about Michelle Carter and Conrad Roy, and the suicide murder case whereby Michelle Carter went to jail for involuntary manslaughter. There's a third thing that you may not know about this case, and that is that these two young people, both of them, were actually looked upon favorably by others. You see, for several years, Conrad, he worked with his father, grandfather, and uncle in his family's marine salvage business, Tucker Roy Marine Towing and Salvage Incorporated. That was there, located in the New England area. And in the spring of 2014, Roy earned his captain's license. That was from the Northeast Maritime Institute by completing 3 months of night classes. Now, in June 2014, he graduated. He actually graduated on the honor roll, the highest grades, from his high school there, where he was from. He was an all-around high school athlete. He played baseball, rode crew, and he ran track. And he graduated, and I get this, with a 3.88 GPA. He was actually accepted to a state university to study business, but at that point, he decided not to go. So by all means, looking on the outside, looked like an all-American guy. And Michelle, as far as she was concerned, others described Michelle this way. Quote, she was really friendly, and she always laughed. I remember, one person said, she always made Conrad laugh. And the softball coach, Ed McFarland, he had known Michelle Carter and her family for a decade. He said the Michelle that he knows is an ideal teammate. Coach McFarland goes on to say, I've never seen her do a mean thing. I've never seen her be mean. He went on to say that other kids liked her and that he never heard a crossword or anything of that nature. And Michelle's high school yearbook, what did it say? Well, it paints a picture of an active, well-liked student, one who was actually voted class clown and voted most likely to, get this, brighten your day. Well, I guess that would be not how her actions would be described on the last day of Conrad's life. And yet, while they were viewed favorable by others, well, each of them had their own personal problems, mental challenges in each of their lives. You see, according to court documents, Roy had allegedly been physically hit by his father, verbally abused by his grandfather, even tried to kill himself in October of 2012, while despondent after his parents had divorced. And after learning that he was planning to kill himself, or Carter repeatedly, at that time, she discouraged him from attempting suicide in 2012, and in 2014, she actually encouraged him to get quote-unquote professional help. However, her attitude for some reason changed in 2014, July. She started thinking that it would just be a good thing to help him die. In June, Roy had texted Carter, suggesting maybe they act like Romeo and Juliet, checking that she understood that they had each killed themselves. Well, Roy struggled with social anxiety and depression, and he had seen several therapists and counselors. He even saw a therapist in the weeks prior to his death. He had been hospitalized for an overdose at the age of 17. Then he was talking to a girl he had met in group, and she had called the police. We see Michelle and Conrad, they also shared something else in common that most people do not know. You see, Michelle had her own struggles too, including an eating disorder, and both of the teens, both of them, at times they took antidepressant drugs. Both of these struggles, well, perhaps it was a formula to disaster. More about what you may not know about the murder texts. The murder by text. More about that in a moment. But first, last week our podcast was entitled Gun Control in 2020. We shared with you how ground zero in the battle on gun control, where gun control versus the Second Amendment, how ground zero could very well be the Commonwealth of Virginia. And on this very day, the day that we published the podcast, January 20th, well, on this very day, January the 20th, 2020, thousands of people, they're converging right now in the state capital of Virginia in Richmond. There they are there to lobby for their Second Amendment rights. Now, don't be fooled by liberal media who locate a few white supremacists and try to tie that to the millions of good law people who practice their Second Amendment rights. You see, these people, by the way, include a variety of races and gender. Black, Hispanic, white, and hey, how about the highest percentage of people that are getting gun permits? Asian. That's right, Asian. You see, it is disgraceful indeed how the media attempts to take Second Amendment supporters and blend them in with the very people that they all stand against. That's white supremacists. It would be like saying all Muslims are terrorists. All black people are supportive of Black Panthers who killed cops. Just not so. There is, however, in Virginia now, a Democrat now that says no to all those lobbyists, because that particular Democrat is now supporting legislation to ban indoor shooting ranges at offices where there are more than 50 employees. It is freshman delegate Dan Helmer. He's now pushing a bill at a time when Democrats are in control of the state house there in Virginia for the first time in a generation. And they're all promising to pass a number of gun control laws. You see, according to Helmer, his bill is needed to protect Virginia's millions of office workers. That's what he says. He says, quote, there are millions of people who work in office buildings in the Commonwealth of Virginia. He goes on to say it doesn't make sense to be establishing businesses in those buildings that have people bringing lots of firearms and ammunition. However, now get this, Helmer denied to the Associated Press that he was actually targeting the National Rifle Association's headquarters, which just happens to be located in northern Virginia. Interesting, though, he could not name another shooting range in the state that would be affected by the bill. Not another one. Couldn't even name one. Of course he couldn't, because we all know he didn't have the guts to admit that it was a definite attack on the NRA. Now, the NRA said legislation would not just hurt its range, but also those belonging to larger sporting goods and gun stores. The group said such ranges are important for gun safety training. This is a gun control bill that will eliminate jobs and destroy small businesses in Virginia. That's what an NRA spokeswoman said. And on its website, the NRA says the indoor shooting range is one of the country's premier family-friendly indoor shooting facilities. It is wheelchair accessible, and it has 15 shooting booths, and it is open to the general public. The National Shooting Sports Foundation, a trade association for firearms industry, they also warned in an interview with the Washington Examiner that Helmer's bill will an absolute threat to small businesses. Going even further, the Foundation Director of Public Affairs said that the legislation, said it would create a backdoor registry of every firearm owner and firearm user in the state. Well, the Virginia governor, Ralph Northam, he's a Democrat. He's backing gun control bills. That includes universal background checks on gun sales, ban on assault rifles, and red flag laws that allow courts and local law enforcement to remove guns from people deemed a risk. However, the Democrats' efforts, unwittingly, they've inspired a fierce grassroots pro-gun movement all across the state. And dozens of counties and towns have declared themselves Second Amendment sanctuaries in recent months. For more about the ground zero and what's happening in the state of Virginia, let me encourage you to go to the podcast. Last week's podcast, Gun Control in 2020. Gun Control in 2020. You can go to our website, charliecrimebuster.com, and there you can find the podcast, Gun Control 2020. Our feature story is the story of murder by text. It goes to say that it's a tragic story. A young man ended his own life by suicide. And the fourth thing you may not know about the murder texting case is that it was not, now get this, listen carefully, it was not the text messages that convinced the judge, but rather it was a phone call. You see, the judge stated prior to his ruling that it was Carter's phone calls with Roy when he was in his truck, gassing himself, as described by Carter's text to friends, rather than the preceding text messages that caused him to go through with killing himself. You see, the phone call calls what the judge said was reckless encouragement to then return to the truck that caused his death. And according to 25 News, she said, "I heard him die," was the message that convicted Michelle Carter. You see, 2 months after Roy died of carbon monoxide poisoning from sitting in his truck with the motor running, Carter sent a text message, Michelle Carter did, to a friend of hers explaining that she believed herself to be responsible for his death. His death is my fault. Like, honestly, I could have stopped him. I was on the phone with him when he got out of the car because it was working, and he got scared, and I told him to get back in. That's what Carter wrote on September the 15th, 2014. And both prosecuting attorneys and the judge pointed to that statement that she was on the phone with him, as the moment that Carter ultimately became responsible for Roy's death. And as the judge explained in court, Roy had conducted extensive research on himself. He bought the generator and parked his truck. But according to Carter's text, Roy got out of the truck when he started to sense that the carbon monoxide was poisoning him. He literally sought fresh air. That's what the judge said, referring to Roy's previously unsuccessful attempts to commit suicide. The judge said that Roy had shown a pattern of choosing to live rather than follow through. And if Carter's text is to be believed, she was on the phone with him when he died, meaning she knew what was happening to him, and in the judge's opinion should have done something to stop him. Miss Carter knows by her own admission that Mr. Roy has followed her instructions. That's what the judge says, as she indicates in various text messages that she sent to her friends. She indicates that she can hear him coughing, that she can hear the loud noise of the motor. And the judge did explain that he didn't lean solely on one instance of Carter's testimony, but he cited a number of other messages sent to other friends. The court notes The judge says that I look for independent work of some of the statements of Miss Carter made to make sure that there was no undue reliance on any one source of evidence. And in text messages dated about July the 12th, the date of Roy's suicide, well, Carter tells other friends she spoke with him on the phone and may have known what was going on. Messages between Carter and Roy indicate she did indeed know what he was doing. Quote, he called me, and I heard like muffled sound, some type of motor running, and it was like that for 20 minutes, and he wouldn't answer. I think he killed himself. That's what she said in the message to a friend. You see, it was a series of messages like that which the judge used to convict her on manslaughter, a decision that has indeed been criticized by free speech advocates. But yet it wasn't the text messages, as many people think. It was a phone call that convicted her. Now, there's a fifth thing that you may not know about that Texan case, and that was that the sentence was appealed. That's right, it was appealed. You see, soon after the sentencing was handed down, well, Carter's lawyers, they asked the judge to issue a stay of sentence until all of the court appeals were exhausted. And on February the 6th, 2019, well, the Massachusetts Supreme Judicial Court ruled that Carter acted with criminal intent when she encouraged Roy into suicide. So her involuntary manslaughter conviction was ordered to stand, and Carter's 15-month prison sentence would be enforced in the new future. Now, the 2.5-year, of course, was suspended, followed by 5 years of probation. And under an order from a Massachusetts judge, Will Carter began serving that 15-month sentence on February the 11th, 2019. And she had also requested a parole hearing for early release, but the parole board denied that on September the 20th in 2019. And then the lawyers petitioned the Supreme Court of the United States. That was in July 2019. They argued that Roy had a history of suicide attempts, and his decision to end his life was his own. But the Supreme Court, they declined to hear of the case in January 2020, which upheld the Massachusetts Supreme Court conviction. So the appeals failed. Well, what can we learn from our feature story? Let's wrap it up. Number 1, the phrase, sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Well, it's just no longer true. Your words can hurt you and others. In our past podcast, Amber Geiger, From Cop to Murder, we mentioned how her texts helped incriminate her in her own trial. You see, she was the Texas policewoman who shot an unarmed black man in his own apartment, mistakenly thinking it was her own apartment. On that podcast, we advised everyone to pause before you post. So think before you speak and pause before you post. It's good words for all of us to take in. You see, that's one thing we can learn. And number 2, while you may get tired and weary and want to give up on others, do not give in. You see, there's a difference between giving up and giving in. Do not give in and help others to destroy themselves. At first, Michelle attempted to help Roy, encouraged him to get help over and over again. Then she gave up. But more than giving up, she gave in, and she pushed him to end his life. Another Charlie motto for you to adopt: if you can't help, don't hurt. And 3, last but not least, there are always people around you hurting. They may be smiling on the outside. Both Roy and Carter were favorably looked upon others, yet they were hurting on the inside. Hey, keep this number handy, 1-800-273-8255. 1-800-273-8255. It is the Suicide Prevention Hotline. Share it when needed. Share it even when you're not sure that it's needed. Again, 1-800-273-8255. We invite you again to join us next week with another podcast where we talk about real crime and how it relates to us and how we can learn lessons from that crime. We encourage you to go to charliecrimebuster.com. Visit the resource page. Make your cell phone a safety tool to help you and to keep you and your family safe in these frightening times of crime. We don't want you to be scared. We want you to be prepared. And until this time next time, this is Charlie Crimebuster reminding you, stay safe, stay alert. For the life you save, it may well be your very own.